Thank you very much. We have a hand up from Phil Watson. If you'd like to ask your question, please, Phil.
Oh, are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good afternoon, Doctor. I'm curious. I live in Barnsley in South Yorkshire, and we have a metro mayor, Mr. Jarvis. Now, if you compare the powers that Mr. Jarvis has, they're nothing compared to what the new mayor for West Yorkshire will have over transport and many issues. I'm particularly interested in what you had to say about health and well-being and the effects transport has on people's health. What would be the priorities for transport? Would it be the economy or people's health? What I'm trying to say is transport is all over the place. You mentioned all these different bodies, transport authority, transport executives, elected mayors, health and well-being, but there's no connectivity, is there, with local government? And perhaps these metro mayors may bring them together a little bit and knock heads together.
That's exactly what I was going to say. This is what metro mayors are actually doing it as well, knocking heads together, forcing people to sit down together. I know the example from Greater Manchester is that Andy Burnham, who's our metro mayor, is asking people from Highways England, from Network Rail or relevant other transport authorities in the area to sit down together once a month on a table to talk, what's happening. And I think this is what Transport for the North is doing as well, because it is what essentially does a bottom-up approach to a partnership, to bringing people together, share good evidence across the different areas. And one thing that I would like to see more of is metro mayors are doing great jobs, city regions are doing great job. What about areas that doesn't have a metro mayor? Like the Carnforth in Lancaster is a small town which needs a huge investment in the transportation system to make its transportation healthy, because 80% of people are just driving their cars because there's no viable public transportation. What about other shire counties where it doesn't have metro mayors or strong advocates for the areas? So I'm hoping to see those areas actually getting a bit of a spotlight as well in the future.
Can I just ask another question there, please, Doctor?
It depends on Tom, if you have time.
Well, I'll be very.
I'm afraid we have to move on to our next presentation, unfortunately. But thank you very much for your question, Phil. I've noticed there's several comments in the chat. What we'll do is collate these and put them to our speakers after the meeting has finished today. Thank you very much for your presentation today, Trevor.
Happy to answer any questions or comments on the chat as well later. I'm here till 2.
Thank you. Our second presentation today is from Dr. Hadi Arbabi, who's a lecturer in the Department of Civil and Structural Engineering at the University of Sheffield. I'll hand over to you now, Hadi.
Thanks. I'm not sure if you've had a screen share enable guests.
My apologies, it should be enabled. Is it coming up at your end?
Yeah, I don't seem to actually see.
I've noticed over a conversation.
Yeah, I did that in case.
The slide. Thank you very much. Matt, if you mind telling me to on to the next, then I will just to share your slides now. Hi everyone, I'm some minor myself with sharing. I'm just up to get the other with. Meantime, happy.
I'm chef the service that urban related boards, air quality, material consumption across Sheffield, the region. Might output problem. I feel like Chagler what we just going to do this is just to who be related. Tom, are we still?
Please, I can't issue it. So on with
back where we the perspective on in economic last 10 years, and this has started to kind of tone down a bit. There was a massive push on the intercity agglomeration through transport back in starting in 2014, and the observation that the productivity in the north was lagging massively behind that of the south, particularly London, and the idea that if we get more people mixing across the north, we'll be able to achieve those economic potential. Now, all right, great. If we go and a slide in. So effectively, the way what has always been implicit behind these policy and mobility backgrounds were abstraction of city as and its economic output as the outcome of all the individual interactions that take place between the inhabitants in the city. And so you could write a parallel into the economic performance that you have in the city as the count of interactions that take place between people and the individual outcome of those interactions that are invariably a function of the skills and the the specialty and the employment status of those individuals involved in that interaction, and also the distance these people have from one another and the mobility services that are available to effectively facilitate overcoming those distances. If we go to the next slide, and for that, it's this tension between the network that is interactions between people and the network that is the physical infrastructure that's embedded inside the city and incorporates those services and mobility modes that enables the movement through that social interaction network. Now, this is also where any of those modes could be embedded. It could be the walking over the network, could be road-based public transport, could be rail-based public transport, the collection of these modes. And so this is how we usually approach modeling movement, density, and particularly economic agglomeration effects. And this is the underlying reasons why that's the usual observation that larger cities do better, are more productive and or resource efficient. These are the assumptions where those come from. So over the last 4 years, if we go to the next slide, please, using these type of arguments on cities, what we've been able to observe for cities has been that most of the arguments about lack of mobility and transport, particularly in the north of England, but throughout the country, for the exception of London, is that these this lack of mobility occurs across spatial scales. It's a problem inside neighborhoods, it remains a problem inside cities, and then it's a problem across the larger metropolitan areas or regions. And the benefit that London has is effectively having that transport infrastructure and mobility that enables those transports rather than just a pure numbers of inhabitants. But what that also means for north of England is that the larger intercity schemes that were in vogue a few years back and kind of where how Transport for the North came about, while very much necessary, will not do the thing that's expected from them unless the intercity needs for mobility, which we observe at recurring spatial scales, have also been addressed beforehand, which brings out the point that the what's required for at least a productivity-driven approach for planning for transport is the multimodal and concurrent deployment of that infrastructure and provisions of mobility, whatever the transport modes may be. So this is agnostic to whether you're advocating walking or taking the bus or cars. It's the lack of those lack of the capacity that enables those movements. And the figure that you're looking at is the exercise we went through trying to recreate a rational pairing of the city regions with agnostic from the cultural or the administrative boundaries from what regions have the transport and the population counts to enable one another for that productivity. Those are effectively the patterns you see at different distances and the different methods trying to create those, but they do give rise to recurring patterns, situations in the Midlands North, and the rational sharing of areas that are close and country, but would from that gradual addition into them. The night. Now, from the need stuff there that we have the tool to bench individual so if it's here this do the other it's based on very cost benefit methodology. We a way by work out long-term or desired outcome for benchmark option. Have a method to construct those system. What was part of the undertook last the inside network by using existing network road that's available and traffic information that network city for the city and over the existing transport infrastructure to find the effectively the version of the city that has the maximum number of social interactions. Now, this is not something to plan and enforce, mostly because of all the other side issues to all the considerations we have for planning, be it health and well-being, and the fact that we usually have a finite amount of resources to access infrastructure, but it does provide that blueprint towards which over long term the planning of the city should perhaps move. If we go to the next slide. This is what effectively we piloted for the neighborhoods in Sheffield, looking at two ways of trying to move these neighborhoods around based on whether we let them, we shuffle them around within the boundaries of the city, or we only shuffle them around within 50% distance of their existing neighbors, as as Sheffield exists in space currently. So if we go to the next slide. Now, we had we had a very trivial observation that denser cities perform better. The denser your city is, the more likely you are to enjoy those a larger number of social interactions. Now, this does have implications as to what transport infrastructure you would then require to deploy to minimize the congestion problems, but it supports the active transport and the modes by walking, mostly because it's minimizing the distances over which those that mobility needs to take place. But if you'll go to the next slide, the main part is that if longer distance mobility is more difficult, so if that's the thing we cannot address or long-term have difficulty addressing, that optimized layout of neighborhoods and where things are in terms of land use and skills and demographic has the much more important role to play in the increase of the productivity potential. So effectively, the numbers you're looking at is the ratio of the number of interactions as a proxy of economic output when we have optimized, when we have sorted the neighborhoods in places that'll increase the number of interactions versus where they are in space normally. And if movement over longer distances are more difficult, you'll get a larger return by putting neighborhoods in specific places as you do it. Right, if we go to the next slide. The other thing was we see when we try to optimize this spatial layout that a homogeneous deployment of mixed-use planning becomes beneficial. Now, this is in support of both the density and the active transport and walking, mostly because while maintaining that density, having a more diffuse, let's say, city center, or the traditional concept of city center, means amenities are homogeneously distributed across cities, keeping everyone in closer distance with the others. So we effectively distribute those number of interactions and desegregate the activities across the city. Those are so the figures you're looking at are the first one on the left is the density of interactions at different neighborhoods, with the yellow being the highest number of interactions, which is really just highlighting where the city center in Sheffield is. And the other two are the change in the distance of individual neighborhoods from the other neighborhoods for the two different scenarios. And what we see in both of them is we effectively, our long-term planning is redistributing that city center across the rest of the neighborhoods rather than having it concentrated at the core inside the city. If we go to the next slide, and finally, the observation was that the highest return in terms of that potential for productivity or increased number of interactions because of this exercise happen in areas that currently are lower in terms of educations or skills in demographic. Now, we can interpret this either as when you do optimize the spatial layouts, you are trying to distribute the benefits across, and it does that for neighborhoods that are disadvantaged more, but also highlights that we can overcome some of these mobility problems, some of the productivity problems, not just through mobility, but investments in infrastructure and education and skills elsewhere. So it's not just about that connectivity. Anywho, so this has been the work that we have piloted. If we go to the next slide, what we are currently working on, since specifically the proof of concept works in terms of having a planning blueprint that doesn't require as much input data as we usually use for land use and transport interaction models, but provides a big picture view of where things might need to be if we are thinking of devising infrastructure, particularly transport and mobility options. So the plan for future work we have, and this is where we are trying to connect with the stakeholders and or local planning organizations, is to extend the geographic boundaries and try to wrap this into a nested social interaction model across state travel to work areas in the north and the overall what used to be the Northern Powerhouse as a whole, and try to look at that mix of reorganizing the spatial structure over the region, and also some refining of the modeling of the distances and services by which we are enabling that mobility. And finally, the other thing this allows is the reformulation of these penalty costs in terms of decarbonisation and emissions, rather than just the economic output. I think that's about it. Sorry, I think I might have overran a bit, but do get in touch with me if any of this was of interest. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Hadi. I see there's a hand up from Shmuel in the section there. So if you'd like to ask your question, please.
Oh, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Oh,
thank you.
I am not an academic, as you probably guess, but I am interested in what these academic theories on transport and the environment have on the population. I'd like to. Has there been any analysis of the effect of Supertram in Sheffield in the 30 or so years it's been in existence, Supertram? Has it had any positive effects of transport in Sheffield, between the universities and the city centre and the outlying villages? And as a final point, I'd like to have some analysis on bus services to outskirts of the villages such as Wortley and places like that, because trying to get to Wortley village without a car is virtually impossible.
Right. So we haven't specifically looked at Supertram per se, but what I can tell about the Supertram and rail-based tram or metro services overall is they've been in decline, and they've been in decline in cities where we observe these mobility problems. So if you were to look at the extent of intra-city rail network mobility that's available, We have actually cut services in Sheffield 1940s onwards, and the ones that are doing better behind London, which has the one that's the exemplary of the type of internal transport, mobility services, are now the Greater Manchester area and the service that runs that runs in Newcastle area.
I guess.
Thank you very much for your question. The next question we have is from Shumiol, which came up as a hand up, please.
You hear me?
I'm afraid we're not currently able to hear you, I'm afraid.
Okay. I want to ask my question. I want to ask you about the difference between accessibility to transport and transport infrastructures of poor and low socioeconomic populations in North England. If we have any difference between accessibility to transport systems between poor and wealthy population. Thank you.
Right. So the pilot project I was walking you through doesn't look at what I believe is more the affordability of that mobility rather than the accessibility. It looks at where things are in space currently. Figuring in the affordability is on our list of things to add to the model. At the moment, it's really captured in the effectively the skills and income levels of the neighborhoods, rather than particularly the distance and the infrastructure between them. But what I can say on the topic of affordability is mostly on it's the change in modes that effectively that being in a poorer or richer neighborhood enforces. Rather than, so for example, in taking Sheffield, the bus services usually exist relatively agnostic of whether or not it's a rich or poor neighborhood. It becomes an affordability of whether the individuals in that neighborhood can afford the services that exist, and the fact that if you're in a richer neighborhood, you're less likely to actually be using those services.
Thank you very much, Hadi. Have one final question for you, which has come up in the chat, which is a question from Felicity Heathcote-Marks, which is on if actor network theory features in your model or analysis.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
The question if actor network theory features in your model or analysis. Not sure if that's an approach you're familiar with, or if that's an approach
not in its effectively formulation in social sciences. Actor network theory does have resemblances to social interaction models we use in social physics, but it does not. Our models, the social physics models, in their in this most simplified form, which is what we used for this trial, do not capture the hierarchy of effectively governance interactions between different types of actors, if that makes sense. They effectively look at individuals as the individual of a given demographic rather than belonging to particular classes that interact differently.
Thank you very much, Hadi. Apologies to anyone who hasn't yet had a chance to ask their question. I'm afraid in the interest of time, we have to move on to our next presentation, which is from Joyce Little, who's a professor of public leadership and enterprise at Northumbria University, and John Shutt, who's a professor of public policy and management also at Northumbria University. Joyce and John, if you are able to share your slides, please do so. If not, I have your slides downloaded, so I can load those up to a
now, Tom. Are they there? Can you see
They
them?
are indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Just to say that nice picture of Newcastle there for you. We do have quite a lot of slides, but we won't be going through them line by line. We're just using them as a prompt. Thank you very much for inviting us. Let me just move on to the next one. Oops. Yeah, we've already said it's myself and John Shutt. I'll do the first half, then hand over to John, and then I'll do some sweeping up later. Just to say that John and I are not transport specialists. We're both regional and local government specialists, strategy and leadership, and John used to be a planner in a past life, and I was a civil servant. Whoops, oh, they've gone. Where have the slides gone?
We can still see your slides, Joyce.
Oh, I can't see them. I'm sorry, I can't see them myself.
If you would like, I could take control of your slides and
yes,
them
please. Now. I can't see them now. They've gone. Okay, they're back. They're back.
On to your third.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today then is complex governance and whether it's fit for purpose at the moment. We'll touch on levelling up, local industrial strategies, and building back better. What we want to do is offer suggestions for TFN. There's some of our work, and at the back of the presentation we also have an appendix with some other work that you might be interested in, and just a couple of them here. The book we did on the North East after Brexit and its impact on policy. We've had a couple of special editions. I'm losing my slides again. Sorry, I don't know what's happening. I'm really sorry about this.
Not a problem at all. We're currently on slide number 4, which is showing your.
Yeah, but I can't see them. I don't know what's happening.
Not a problem. If you'd like to share those again, or I can do so and drive your slides for you, whichever you prefer.
If you could share them, they're not coming up. Sorry.
We can see them now. We've reshared your screen there.
I can't see them now.
Okay, not a problem at all. I'll just load up your presentation now. Do apologise everyone for the technical issues we've been having this afternoon. Hopefully these won't interrupt the presentation any further. Joyce, back to you. We can see your slide there.
Okay, so moving on then to share of GDP, you can see the North East at the bottom there. This is 2018. However, things may have gotten worse under COVID. This slide is about fragmentation. I don't intend to go through this all, just to say that since 2010, English local governance and governance in general is probably the most fragmented in the world, to such an extent that people working in the system don't even understand it, and also they're having to join up the dots for themselves. Just to highlight 3 or 4 on here, the first speaker said we have lots and lots of stop and start policy, which is absolutely true in economic and in the social policy world. We've got fragmentation in funding and in bidding, very competitive deal making, and there is no single pot. People have been lobbying for this for quite some time, but we still don't have any joined upness in funding and bidding. Fragmentation in data sources as well, and we're at the lowest level since 2010 on any research and evaluation of what's happening at the local level in terms of impacts. And one key thing for me, obviously from a civil service background, is fragmentation of accountability. So in actual fact, it's very difficult to understand who's responsible for what, and who has the legitimacy, etc. And we do believe that the mayors have been bypassed in some of the recovery planning phases. So it's very difficult to understand who's doing what. So fragmentation rules. So we've got very, very complicated governance in every policy area, including in transport. So in every policy area, you have hundreds of statutory and non-statutory agencies involved. The government has declared that combined authorities and mayoral arrangements will be the preferred form of governance. despite some of the county councils and the unitary authorities lobbying for other forms of governance. So in effect, we have little coterminosity, we have a growth in wicked issues, and because of the dominance previously in economic policy, the core cities have dominated the agenda. John's going to be talking later about levelling up in more detail, but one thing I would say at the end of this slide is that there is a lot of lack of institutional memory, particularly when the RDAs and government offices were abolished, and I refer to this as organisational amnesia. So what's happening is we get new agencies started up, then they get disbanded, they get abolished. There's no kind of passing on of the knowledge or the information, and there's a lack of history and amnesia. So here we have, the combined authorities. Devolution is still not clear. We're told that there's a white paper coming out 2021, but there's also a suggestion that maybe it'll be combined into levelling up legislation as well. So what we would suggest is maybe we need to look to the European models of devolution, but it's all up in the air at the moment. As far as LEPs are concerned, there's a review of LEPs going on at the moment. Will they be abolished or will they be absorbed into combined authorities? None of us know. It's just very, very complicated, and I'll come shortly to funding and what have you. But it's very, very, very complicated. Looking at finances, it's very difficult actually to get any sort of sense of how combined authorities are being funded, and we can't get concrete figures, whether it's for transport or anything else or any other policies. We've got lots and lots of. This doesn't include all of them. John and I did this with some work from, with some help from the House of Commons Library. But just to update this a little bit, there is a devolution deal for Sheffield that's just been agreed with £350 million local growth fund. £350 million local growth fund, £166 million transforming cities fund, and a £2 million capacity building fund. The North of Tyne Combined Authority as well has recently received £2 million for capacity building as well, but as far as we know, we're not sure what's happening in terms of local growth fund or transforming cities fund. But we use this just to show you just how complicated things are. It's very difficult to get a handle on how these bodies are being funded, given the stop and start policies, the stop and start funding, and the stop and start bidding processes as well. So I'm going to hand you over to John now to talk about the Northern Powerhouse and transport policy in particular, and then I'll sweep up at the end when John's finished. Over to you, John. Tell me when you want me to move the slide.
I can take control.
Okay, John, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so
Can you, John? Okay.
Actually, can you put the slides back up? I seem to have lost them for some reason.
Yeah, it's not easy, is it? Let me try again, John.
Yes, I will do.
There we go. Do you want me to manage them, John?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So if we go back to the Northern
Yeah,
Powerhouse.
apologies for this. Let's go on to number 11, where we were.
Yeah.
Okay, John.
I think we've said that, the usefulness of this group is that we need to sort of keep up to date with the data and how to use it and analyze it. And I'm just sort of starting to draw your attention to the deprivation data for 2019, which was only just recently released and begins to show, that how bad things are moving between 2015 and 19 in the Northern Powerhouse area. And again, perhaps insufficient attention to what this shows in the Tees Valley, for example, and the fact that sort of Blackburn and Darwin and Hartlepool have joined the top 10 most deprived local authorities. And sort of thinking that through and what that implies for local government is often sort of, we're lagging sometimes in using this data and thinking it through in policy making terms. If we move on, Joyce. So we've got the Northern Powerhouse and Transport for the North, and Transport for the North doing a good job presenting their business case. We now sort of have to ask the question, sort of, is there going to be continued policy support from central government for Northern Powerhouse and Transport for the North in this next period? Because so far we're beginning to see a sort of rollback from some of these sort of pan-regional concepts, and this is quite worrying. And I think we ourselves have got a lot of responsibility to make sure that we increase collaboration across the three northern regions. Move on, Joyce. So we've got the integrated rail plan, and it's essential that sort of we get a grip of both Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2 integration. And a lot of these big capital schemes are receiving a lot of scrutiny, but we've got to make sure that we understand how things are proceeding with phase 2 and what the implications are going to be for the North, and the North issues are explored in terms of looking at the implications on growth. Joyce, can you move on? And here we've got Transport for the North's sort of key views about what they're going to deliver for the next 2 years. And, a focus on rebuilding passenger numbers after COVID, working with the train operators and DFT and Network Rail to get clarity on the rail investment plans. And clearly the forthcoming spending review is going to be critical, and we need to complete the investment in Northern Power Rail and agree what the priorities are as we move into the next phase of development. So at the same time, Transport for the North is consulting on the decarbonisation strategy and increasing the kind of work that it's doing for COP26, and looking at the freight strategy and the logistics strategy for the North. And again, all of this work's very important. But what we're witnessing is, if you move on, Joyce, that there's a sort of a reaction occurring in planning, where the planning reforms are sort of undermining some of the integration work that's going on. A warning just this week from CPRE and Sustrans and Transport Planning Society about the sort of decisions that have been made in the private sector. Many new housing, which is a lot of the targets are being relaxed, and a lot of the sites are being built in places that don't serve public transport well, and they're inaccessible and only accessible by car. And there's insufficient sort of attention to these issues because of the lack of integration. Now, I'll draw your attention to the excellent work of Alistair Baldwin in Newcastle and Kelly Shuttleworth at the Institute of Government, and the recent pamphlet that they've done on how governments are using transport evidence. But again, we've been talking about it today, the DFT, there's a lack of integration between the rail plans, the road plans, aviation, maritime, and the bus, cycling and walking plans. And although the new sort of attention to bus and cycling is very welcome, we've got a big problem about how we develop greater coordination between Transport for the North, between the mayoral combined authorities, and we've just had a new mayor elected for Leeds City Region. So we're beginning to see 11 of the 13 combined authorities get some shape, but it's exceedingly complex and difficult. And you need to think about the nature of the different combined authorities. We've seen a lot of attention to the excellent work that Ben Houchen's been doing, trying to build the combined authority in the Tees Valley, and the rail integration plan that the Tees Valley Combined Authority has done is very good, and we need to sort of do more of this and think that through. But generally, the problem is that the combined authorities don't work together readily enough, and they don't work together strongly enough with Transport for the North. So we need to pay attention to some of these details. Now, in the Northeast, we've got this particular problem of a combined authority for the Tees Valley run by Conservative Ben Houchen, and a new combined authority for North of Tyne run by Jamie Driscoll, the Labour candidate. And that's the newest of the combined authorities. So it's still at an early days and it's not got enough resources. But in the middle of the Northeast, we've got no clear view about the future of the combined authority. There is a combined authority, it's called NECA, but there's no clear view about where that's proceeding to, and how to get a long-term settlement for the Northeast. So this, of course, makes strategic planning extremely difficult. And then on top of this, we've got to cope with the situation as we come out of COVID, and the strains that that's producing on the public transport system, and what the implications of that are. So move on, Joyce. So COVID recovery plans and building back better is the sort of mantra, and there's a lot of work going on looking at the COVID recovery plans that the combined authorities are bringing forward, but it's recognizing how some of the transport plans fit in with Transport for the North and some of the priorities. And in the recovery plans, we're also seeing announcements. So announcements about rail plans, for example, move on, Joyce, which are connected to the levelling up agenda. And some of the announcements, for example, in the Northeast, the Northumberland line announcement, or the announcement about Hartlepool to Darlington rail investment that's expected, they're not necessarily sort of well embedded into Transport for the North thinking, and we need to increase the amount of collaboration that's taking place as these schemes are announced. So we've got a whole range of new programs which are coming in and which are being bid for, and of course we're always keen to sort of say what the combined authorities should do or what local government should do, but there's a huge capacity problem inside local government in terms of the ability to bid for these funds and the amount of time it takes up. And Levelling Up Fund is a good example of a fund that's suddenly come on the scene, and it's been highly critical in terms of the allocations, but also when you look at some of the requirements on the spend and the impossibility of achieving spend in such short timescales, there are a lot of difficulties ahead in terms of reaching agreement on which schemes are being prioritised, and there's a sort of a lack of clarity of purpose and partnership. And again, we've got to be wary of a view that, trying to split the core cities off from the key cities and the secondary centres. And again, at the moment, what's being played out is very much sort of a view that it's the core cities have had too much resources, and that the key cities need more resources, and that somehow interventions required to provide for their direct needs, without discussing the sort of implications of some of the decisions that are being made. So where we've got a lot of new investment, in a place like Darlington, with a new Treasury campus coming forward, for example, with Amazon moving in as a key employer, employing 1,000 people. Things are changing very dramatically, and it's important that the transport planning responds to these changes. We come back to, the difficulties around the sort of the devolution process and the lack of progress on it, and the real lack of progress on integrating policy. There's no clear view about how transport fits with economic and environmental policy and social policy at the moment. And what Joyce and I are arguing is that if we want to shift some of the deep-seated deprivation in places like the Tees Valley, then we've actually got to do a lot better job in this kind of policy integration. And until these issues get recognised by central government, then we're going to be faced with a lot of wasted time through a lot of new small initiatives. And we need initiatives which are integrated, which are going to shift the problems in a fundamental way.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay. So just to summarise for the next couple of slides very quickly then, what we're arguing is we need a clearer framework and lead from central government, because there's still a lot of silo thinking. All the departments aren't working together well. Everyone at the table, not just dominated by the core cities. We need better integration of programmes, agencies and policy integration rather than the stop and start. We need, in order to get to Build Better Back, and we certainly do need more data, because once we got the RDA going and, ONS people were drafted back, there's very little comprehensive data on the local areas. Local government associations probably the only area, the only agency that has a comprehensive overview. So we need to think about that. We need a better strategic overview of the social and economic priorities after COVID. We need much more coordination between TFN, Northern Powerhouse and local authorities. And also the local industrial strategies now seem to be morphing into the green plan without much thought about that. And think about how all of these things have implications for transport. So joining up the dots more, listening to the Queen's speech yesterday, obviously there are more policies to come, and we do need more evaluation on impacts at local level. And the final one then is that the government's putting a lot of emphasis on place leadership. And it's a big issue, because even if we get devolution, that doesn't mean that the historical conflicts are going to go. And there's an issue of who's legitimately acting on behalf of the cities and on behalf of the areas. We need collective leadership at different levels. And Northern Powerhouse is a very good concept, but we argue that its lack of accountability and communication is a real problem. So TFN plans for the next period up to 2030 definitely are a good start, but they need support from both central government and local government. And we'll stop there, but I think we're kind of on time now. Thank you.
You are, absolutely. Thank you very much, John and Joyce, for a very interesting and very detailed presentation there. I noticed there are a couple of hands up in the chat. If I can go to John Borden, please.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for a really interesting presentation. I'm based in the bit of the northeast, which you mentioned, which is sort of in the middle of the two mayoral combined authorities. So I'm based in the northeast combined authority area. And I guess the point I'd make is there's one thing you actually didn't mention in your presentation, that is that every authority in the northeast, and indeed most across the north, have signed up to very challenging targets to become carbon neutral. And I think all the 7 authorities in the northeast combined authority, north of town combined authority, have set targets to be carbon neutral by 2030. And really, that's only 9 years away. It's an absolutely massive, to get from where we are now to carbon neutral by 2030 is an absolute undertaking. And I guess my question is, or I guess my comment is that given all the institutional challenges that you've commented on and the sort of governance issues, how feasible is it that they could, that under the present system we could get anywhere near achieving that transformation within just 9 years?
Well, I have a view on that we can't, but John's our green guru, so I'm going to let John answer.
I'm not a green guru. I think it's clear that we can't, and that we've got to get a much better focus at regional and local level on these issues, and we've got to get a much better focus at national level as well on them. And that it's all very well for sort of targets associated with COP26 and so on to be accelerated at a public relations level, but trying to actually change policy inside a particular city. And I've referred to the issue of the Northumberland line is a good example for the arrangements between Northumberland County Council and the North of Tyne Combined Authority, and looking at how the rail policies align with housing and with other key investment strands. It's not good enough. We need a much greater focus on integrated planning for some of these major schemes.
Thank you very much for your question, John. I'm afraid we're running slightly behind time, so I'd say thank you very much to John and to Joyce for your very interesting presentation, and to those who have been commenting in the chat as well. As I mentioned previously, we'll be collating these and sending a copy of these along to our speakers for them to consider as well. So thank you very much for your presentation. Our final presentation today is from Emma Rosolick, who's a Senior Evidence and Analysis Officer at Transport for the North, and from Matt Smith and Dr. Felicity Hiscoe-Marks from Atkins. If I'd like to hand over to you, please.
Great, thank you very much, Tom. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Senior Evidence and Analysis Officer at Transport for the North in the Economics and Research team. Earlier this year, Transport for the North commissioned two related projects, which were seeking to improve our understanding of the importance of the visitor economy in the north of England and the importance of transport for enabling and supporting the visitor economy. So together, these projects seek to ensure that across different aspects of Transport for the North's work, including our policy and strategy development, our programme development, our modelling and appraisal, and development of business cases for transport investment, that across different aspects of our work, we can recognise the opportunities to support the North's visitor economy and the impact that this would have on the wider prosperity across the North. So one of these projects, which is the focus of the presentation that we'll be sharing today, set out to establish a profile of the visitor economy across the North, to understand the transport patterns associated with the visitor economy, and ultimately to make some recommendations for transport-based solutions which can support the visitor economy to recover post the COVID pandemic, and also to stimulate its future growth in a sustainable way. So today I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Matt Smith and Felicity Hiscoe-Marks from Atkins, and they are leading on this work for us, and they'll be presenting an overview of the study and some of our findings to date. So thank you very much both for joining us today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Emma.
Thanks so much, Emma. That's great introduction there to the project. So just some introductions from us, the Atkins team. As Emma mentioned, I'm Dr. Felicity Hiscoe-Marks, Technical Lead for Research and Behaviours and in the Atkins IMST practice, which is Intelligent Mobility and Smart Technologies. I have a PhD in ethnography and organisation studies, was at Manchester Business School doing some teaching there before coming over to Atkins about 4 years ago. Matt Smith is also on the call with us today. He'll be taking us through a lot of the slides. Matt's a consultant and qualitative research specialist who has completed a master's in qualitative research and human geography. So our team is quite a bespoke team. We comprise research specialists across a range of techniques, including those on the screen there. We're both, me and Matt, based in Manchester, very much rooted in the northern visitor economy ourselves. And we've delivered customer and stakeholder research work for Highways England quite extensively, DfT, and multiple local authorities, as well as supporting TfN to further develop the evidence base for this visitor economy focused project. We are the Lot 2 consultants for the Visitor Economy and Transport Commission. Next slide, please. I think Matt's going to now take us through the approach and methodology.
Thanks, Felicity. So on this study, we followed a very much mixed methods approach, combining research, both primary research and also secondary research. The project commenced with some secondary research, analysing some quantitative data sets from the ONS, the Department for Transport, Transport Focus, and Visit Britain. And we also looked at local data sources and analysed and interpreted those, such as STEAM, the Scarborough Tourism Economic Assessment Model. And following on from the baselining work, the secondary quantitative research, we have undertaken primary qualitative research, which has involved focus groups of residents of the north of England, focus groups with residents living outside the north of England, workshops with industry stakeholders to understand how the industry can be supported by Transport for North and their partners, and also that has been underpinned by a participant-led thematic approach to the analysis and iterative identification of findings from the data. And all this research has been underpinned by an agreed definition of the visitor economy, which we agreed with Transport for the North and the project steering group, which comprises of members, stakeholders from the visitor economy. And the definition of the visitor economy which we adopted is that the visitor economy encompasses both the direct and indirect contributions to the economy resulting from a visitor travelling outside their usual environment for a holiday, leisure and events, business, retail and festivals. And the visitor economy encompasses all the things that attract visitors, so places and visitor attractions, the infrastructure which supports the visit while people are there, so transport, and creating a sense of place and wayfinding infrastructure, and then services which cater for the needs of visitors, such as hotels and restaurants and other economic activity. What we'll do first is take you through some of the baseline findings to understand the geography and the scale of the north of England's visitor economy. This slide here shows a couple of maps from our interim report, which we submitted to Transport for the North a few weeks ago. The map on the left is showing domestic day visits to the north of England, and it shows a very clear geography to visits to the north of England, with many visits being within the main cities such as Manchester and Leeds, but also some hotspots around coastal areas such as Scarborough, Blackpool, and also key rural locations such as the Lake District and the Peak District. And our research identified that in 2019 there were a total of 420 million visits to the north of England. The majority of those were domestic visitors, but there are also a very important international visitor economy market for the north of England, and that is largely concentrated around the north of England's, what I call the north of England's central belt, cities such as Manchester and York, particularly significant with that regard. On the right-hand side, we've got a map showing the most reported trip purpose for visitors within the domestic market who are travelling to the north of England from other parts of England. And again, there's a very clear geography to this. There's a lot of trips to visit friends and relatives within the urban areas and the southwestern quadrant of the north, also the East Riding of Yorkshire and around Durham and parts of the northeast. Business trips are the most popular reason for visiting the north of England to South Yorkshire, West Yorkshire and Warrington, and then the North's more rural areas such as North Yorkshire, Cumbria and Northumberland are very popular holiday-based locations for people. We also examined businesses and economic activity within the visitor economy. And here we found that there are around 39,000 businesses employing 477,000 people in the north of England. Therefore, the visitor economy is a very important aspect of the North's economic activity, and therefore is a very important sector to consider when considering policy changes and interventions. The largest numbers of businesses and the largest amounts of employment in a number counting perspective are in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool, County Durham, East Riding of Yorkshire. However, what is quite interesting is to look at the density of businesses, and that is outlined by the graph in the bottom left-hand corner of the slide, and that shows that in the borough of Scarborough, the borough of Blackpool and the borough of South Lakeland, the visitor economy comprises of more than 10% of all businesses, which shows that while in absolute terms those areas might not have the largest numbers of businesses, those areas are actually most dependent upon the visitor economy, and therefore this shows the importance of the sector to those areas and how the importance of the sector varies across the north of England. We also conducted some overall value calculations for the north of England's visitor economy, and we found that there's a total visitor spend of over £21 billion in 2019, which creates a direct GVA contribution of around £10 billion, depending upon a higher or lower estimate. And that creates a total net GVA contribution to the north of England of around £12 billion, again showing the significance and value of the sector to the region. In terms of travel patterns, we've analysed a range of data sources, including the International Passenger Survey and the National Travel Survey. And what we've found is there are three key sets of flows, and those are from urban areas to other urban areas, for example, between Liverpool and West Yorkshire or Manchester and West Yorkshire. There are also quite significant flows from urban areas to rural areas, for example, from Manchester.
I think Matt may have just frozen on us. I think Matt is controlling the slides. Just give it a sec in case it comes back. If not, we may have to ask Tom, do you have the slides to share? Or
yes,
else I can. Okay, that might be good. Hopefully Matt will be back with us very soon. One of those days for slide problems, isn't it?
Absolutely so. Just loading up your presentation now, and I'll skip along to the onto the relevant slide.
Oh, thank you very much. That's great.
I'm very sorry, we had a momentary power cut in my house. I've managed to get back on using the mobile hotspot on my phone. Tom, did I hear you say you were going to share the slides, or are the slides now showing again?
Tom's just going to share the slides. Matt, I think, can you see that, the right slide now?
Just want to check. Felicity, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can hear you after your slide, I believe, is on where you were before.
I think it's still sharing on me. Ah, right, cool. Sorry, I just pressed stop sharing then. I wasn't sure if you could see that, so let me start sharing again. Is that visible?
It's not yet to me, I'm afraid. There we are, that's visible.
Here we go.
Thank you, Matt.
Lovely. I will start again on this slide, and hopefully there won't be. What I'll do is I'll just turn my video off just to save bandwidth, I think. So as I was saying, there are three key travel flows within the north of England. So between the North's urban areas, for example, from to West Yorkshire and Manchester to West Yorkshire, but also quite sizable flows between urban and rural areas, for example, between Greater Manchester and Cumbria. But there are also quite a few urban to coastal flows as well, from Manchester to Blackpool and over to Scarborough on the east coast of the country, and also some smaller flows around rural areas of the north too. We also looked at data on rail journeys, both within the north and to and from the north of England. So what was quite interesting from our analysis of this data is the very different levels of patronage of rail from a intra-northern perspective compared to an inter-northern perspective. So for journeys from outside the north into the north, surface rail has a larger modal share than on average for long distance journeys within Great Britain as a whole at 17% versus 16%. However, for journeys within the north of England, rail only has a modal share of 8%, so half the modal share that it has outside compared to the Great British average, and also for journeys to and from north. And these findings were verified and further explored through focus groups of residents of the North and Great Britain, and there were some quite interesting findings in our discussions during the focus group about place when travelling by rail within the North of England in comparison by rail to and from the North of England. I'll hand back over to Felicity now, and she will take you through some of the primary research findings from our focus groups.
Thanks very much, Matt. That's great. Just to let you know, your sound isn't great. So just letting you know that in case you can reconnect to your Wi-Fi. If we go to the next slide.
I will try and do that, yeah.
Okay, if we just go to the next slide.
Maybe it's not updating, Felicity. I am on high-level themes from the focus group on my screen. It's perhaps not updating.
It's updating now. Here we go. Our focus group design. So if we just go to the focus group design slide just for a moment. So basically, everyone, what we did with the focus groups was we did 6 focus groups with northern residents, and we split those between northern cities, northern towns and northern villages, and then we did some, if you like, control group focus groups with non-northern residents, so one from the cities, one from towns and one from the villages, all outside the north. This was really to give us a really broad perspective of what northern residents thought, felt, and what their current experiences were with travelling and in terms of their leisure journeys in the north, and then those who weren't from the north. And there's a bit of information about the breakdown of the groups there. We tried to make sure that we recruited a representative sample for the different demographics of the cities, and obviously an even gender split, and we made sure that we had some participants who had different kinds of mobility issues to provide that really important specific perspective. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is the high-level themes of the focus group. So just going to run through some of these. We can see 10 key themes on the slide here. So number 1, the North has got multifaceted attractions for visitors. So this came up again and again. Lots of the northern and non-northern residents talked about different reasons for visiting the North. So it wasn't just the culture or the countryside or the people or the food or any one thing. It was a whole multitude of things that were multifaceted attractions for different kinds of visitor groups. Number 2, there's a preference for shorter trips amongst residents. And number 3, there's a preference for longer weekend or longer 47-night stays for non-northern residents. So we found this, again, was a recurring theme and was linked to the transport issues for people who lived further away from northern visitor destinations, not thinking it was worthwhile to visit for a day trip because they'd be spending too long on transport. Also the value for money issues, and also people that live in the north have got a higher amount of knowledge about what attractions there might be, so it's easier for them to think for just travelling for a day trip. Number 4, cost was a real barrier for some groups that keeps them away from the north or keeps them from visiting the north more often. So we'll talk more about that later as well. Number 5, insufficient, easily accessible information about what the north has to offer as a region for visitors. This also came up multiple times across the northern and non-northern focus groups. People wanted more information, but they didn't know where to find it. There's this reliance on private car trips to northern destinations, particularly for northern destinations that might be in more rural areas. The automatic assumption is that we need a car, or you need to travel by car, or areas just aren't served very well by current public transport offerings. Number 7, public transport poses a significant barrier to both northern and non-northern residents when considering that leisure trip to the north. So again, similar to number 6, if public transport isn't there or you're not aware of what services are available, you're going to go straight to your car and assume that you're going to need to drive. So that was a significant issue. Number 8, there's a split between visitors who are keen to return to public transport post the COVID pandemic and those who are much more nervous to return, particularly to urban areas for leisure trips. So we thought that was a really interesting finding and something that we're going to need to keep an eye on. TFN's need to keep an eye on as time goes on and as the COVID pandemic hopefully subsides, see if that demand can return. Number 9, accessibility and inclusivity of transport needs to be improved. So again, this was particularly an issue for those focus group participants who had mobility issues or who were older. They talked again about that barrier to travelling by bus and by train because the services weren't as user-friendly for those who have got those additional needs, and particularly thinking about more rural areas where it might not be easy to get a wheelchair or mobility scooter up to particular places of interest. And finally, number 10, there's this demand for increased and improved active travel and micro-mobility travel options for visitors in the north. So again, we carried out an activity with our focus groups to get them to rank and to rate certain options that would encourage them to visit the north, and active travel and micromobility travel was quite an interesting one there for them. Mixed responses, but a lot of people would like to cycle more or to walk more or to use e-scooters or e-bikes if they were available. So there's a bit of latent demand there and demand that's untapped. So we thought that was quite interesting. Next slide, please. Thank you. And here are just some quotes, first from the northern resident focus groups, and then we've got some from the non-northern. So these are just to bring the themes to life a little bit for you. So I won't read all of these out, but you can see how some of the key quotes reflect our key themes. So somebody's saying that all the companies need to work together. Where I live, we've got these 4 bus companies. They need different tickets to travel on different buses, not very joined up. Somebody also saying that they would really like to have a tourist pass that they could use across different destinations in the north, which again was something that came up again and again for our residents and non-northern residents in focus groups that they would find quite attractive. And then again, finding up-to-date and accurate information isn't as good as it should be, especially in the rural areas where you need to have that confidence that public transport can get you there and get you home. And somebody that was registered disabled, and again, just saying that was their biggest barrier to visiting some of these places that we were talking about in the focus groups. And then someone that's been using the electric scooters that have been introduced in Liverpool city centre, saying, that they were great, something different to try, but at the same time, it's a kind of replacement for walking for them. So maybe not something that we'd want to introduce into areas where you'd want to be encouraging walking from a policy point of view. Next slide, please. And here are just some of the quotes from the non-northern residents. Again, quite interesting. The first one just reflecting that theme around non-northern residents preferring the longer trips rather than the day trips, because transport just takes longer, and it's seen as less reliable and less certain. And then number two, we thought this was going to come out at some point. Some people thinking the North is a bit bleak, is maybe not as nice as it could be, this old stereotype. So, somebody saying we should really promote more that the North is not like that, and it's got so much to offer people who don't live in the North and might not realise that. And then again, the cost of public transport being just not value for money compared to the car, and the convenience of it as well. Somebody talking about how they're often advertised to from Visit Wales, but they don't see anything about visiting the North. So that's a bit of a missed opportunity for the North. And then again, just something about this multi-layers of transport using up people's time. So again, putting people off actually travelling to the North by public transport because of all the changes and the delays that they might face there. Next slide, please. So Matt is going to take us through the stakeholder engagement findings now.
Thanks, Felicity. So alongside our engagement with members of the public, both living in the North, to a range of stakeholders, I think approximately 40 through 4 stakeholder workshops and 6 individual consultations. And they were representatives of a range of organisations, including travel and tourism industry bodies, destination management organisations such as Marketing Manchester and Cumbria Tourism, local authorities and local enterprise partnerships, and also transport operators across all public transport modes, bus, rail, and also highways. The purpose of these activities was to understand what their views were on the post-COVID recovery of leisure travel, and what Transport for the North could do to support their work, and also the wider visitor economy in the north of England. And we also presented back to them some of the findings from the focus groups with members of the public to help understand their perspective on customer issues. In terms of the findings of this engagement, again, like the focus groups, we have developed a number of thematic findings. So just to take you through those quickly, the first finding is a notable change in visitor demographics following the first lockdown, with areas now seeing quite different age groups or visitor origin points coming to visit parts of the North. There have been quite a few changes to travel mode preference, travel patterns and destination choice. I remember speaking to a stakeholder from Northern Rail recently. They told me that Sunday is now their busiest day, whereas in fact in the past Sunday was always a very quiet day on the railway. There are historic challenges with industry collaboration and multimodal integration, and also inconsistency of the public transport offer. Long-term funding is quite hard to come by, so it's very difficult to establish new public transport services with consistency over multiple years. Last mile connectivity is also a challenge for the region. However, on some positive points, there are existing pockets of good practice which can be rolled out more widely. And the North has a very strong natural environment, social and cultural offer, which again could be marketed more widely. Just a few quotes really and extracts from the stakeholder engagement. This first quote I felt really exemplified some of the consistency challenges with public transport. For example, services on some lines, 2 out of 3 of the trains might be new trains, and then the third train running on that route might be a much older train. And that lack of consistency is a key barrier not only to members of the public, but also people who work within the travel and tourism industry, and something which many organisations would like to see developed into a more consistent offer. The second quote highlights the changes around visitor demographic. Taking the example of the Lake District, they're now seeing people travelling from places such as Birmingham, where historically people would have travelled to Wales from Birmingham, but because of COVID border closures and COVID travel restrictions, people are seeking new places to go on holiday. And also as a result of staying at home and taking staycations, people are looking to explore other places within the country. And people are also now looking to explore harder to reach areas, and those places often don't have the infrastructure, so there's quite a lot of management challenges around that. And then finally, a stakeholder suggested that TFN could play quite a key role in helping to bring stakeholders together, helping to coordinate the marketing efforts of the north of England as a collective destination as opposed to several smaller DMOs. And particularly so that it doesn't end up in a competitive position, but more on a collaborative footing where everybody benefits from that collective discussion.
Thanks, Matt. And then just finally, pretty much our final slide now, initial conclusions and next steps. So our secondary research identified the significance of the visitor economy, as you've seen from Matt's slides earlier, as a sector in the north of England. And we've obviously got quite a lot of numerical data around that. So that's one output, but just to focus again on the user and stakeholder research, this has identified quite similar themes to each other, including those USPs for attractions for visiting the north, as well as a number of barriers that have been identified by the qualitative research and improvements that could be made to make the North transport services better serve the needs of visitors, but also the residents of the North as well. So we've just got a few of those findings here up on the slide. So more reliable and joined up services, better value for money, including transport tickets or package deals, better provision for active travel on public transport. Something that came up quite a lot was this desire for bike carriages on trains and also secure bike storage facilities at destinations. And then finally, a more joined up approach across the North on ticketing and marketing of attractions. And I'd also add as well that that point John and Joyce made earlier about the need for more collaboration between the combined authorities in terms of with each other, but also with bodies like TFN was also a theme that came up in our stakeholder research. So yeah, really on point there. And then I think we just have a final slide about more kind of admin bits, the next steps. So we're in the kind of analysis and write-up stage of the project now. We'll be providing a final draft report to TFN by the 28th of May. Then comments will be made by TFN and our steering group, those stakeholders. We'll respond to those, and then the final report will be submitted to TFN in July and will later be published on the TFN website for continued use by stakeholders and also for the public, and it will be promoted widely to support the implementation of the report's recommendations. So that's us. We've got our myself and Matt's email addresses on the screen there. If anyone does have any specific questions, we'll also be looking in the chat. But thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you very much, Felicity and Matt. It was a very interesting presentation. I've noticed a couple of comments that have come through in the chat. Firstly, one from Owen suggesting that the need for a One North brand or a visitor campaign around a single brand for the north of England. I wonder if you had any comments based on your evidence around the potential effectiveness of that.
I think it would be really, I think it would be really effective, and something that is borne out through our focus group research. The participant who mentioned about Visit Wales. Obviously Wales is a country, not a region like the north of England, and obviously there is Visit Britain and Visit England as well within that hierarchy. But then there are also several sub-regions of Wales with their own tourism management organisations. And I think that particularly the strength of that Visit Britain brand and the targeting of their marketing was clearly quite effective. And clearly for quite a few people we've spoken to as part of this study, having that very clear branding would be really helpful. People really want to visit the north. They perhaps see it as a place where they'd want to do more of a touring trip and maybe crossing quite a lot of boundaries between different parts of the north, and maybe taking in a city, a national park, and also a market town while they're in the region. And those might be spread over 2 or 3 different of the current DMOs, and therefore having that more cohesive branding would really help. And also from an industry side, that is something that our stakeholder engagement has shown us would be really welcome. That collaborative approach to attracting more visitors and encouraging them to stay within the north of England would be really welcomed.
Thank you very much. And just to build on a comment from Kate a little, I don't know if you've seen that in the chat, a comment I think we can very much all agree with on the North being a wonderful place to visit and to be. I wonder how significant the perception gap around different areas of the country is for the Northern visitor economy, and if you have any evidence or intention to explore areas where there is a particular problem around perceptions of the North of England.
Yeah, I think that's, again, a really good question. In terms of our secondary or quantitative research, I don't think we picked up too much on that, but in terms of the qualitative research and asking people who lived in the North and people who didn't live in the North about their perceptions and sentiments around the North of England and what would attract them to visiting the North, we did get some very interesting comments. Certainly those who were non-residents of the North, they tended to focus on the more well-known areas, so the rural, the seaside, the big city areas in particular. There did seem to be a perception that you know, some areas of the North were, as that quote earlier kind of alluded to, still a bit grim, you know, still maybe not a place that people who didn't live in the North and didn't know about those areas would come on holiday or come to visit. So yeah, there was certainly some of that stereotyping that continued. I think we'll be able to provide more detail about that in the final report. But you know, there certainly were some comments about certain areas. I think Newcastle came up a couple of times, but Blackpool kind of this sort of split perception around the area around Blackpool and Liverpool as well. So again, it's going to be an interesting, I think, journey for some of these places post-COVID, and whether they can, you know, really market their cultural and other kinds of offerings to get over those kinds of negative perceptions, particularly with the staycation visitor economy booming this year, particularly this summer. So hopefully that will then lead to some longer term new visitor segments coming to those areas, and maybe not always going abroad or not always going to the traditional places like the Lake District that might already be fully booked out, so people have to go to other places this year. But yeah, definitely interesting point around the perceptions.
Thank you very much. And if there are any other comments that we haven't picked up on in the chat there, we'll of course share those on with you. But thanks again for your presentation today. Just a final couple of comments from me before we end the forum today, just to say thank you all very much for joining us, and thank you again for all of our speakers for some very interesting presentations. Apologies for the technical issues which we've experienced throughout the day, and I hope you are still able to enjoy our interesting presentations, and we'll certainly take some of the feedback that's in the chat on board for the next session with regards to those technical issues. The next forum will be held on Wednesday, the 18th of August, and more information on this will be sent out to you shortly. We're very interested and keen to hear from anyone attending today who would like to present on research which is connected to our core themes, which are summarised on the slide there. We're also going to be sending out information on the development of the Northern Evidence Hub, which offers a platform where academics and local policymakers can share evidence and collaborate. If you'd like to get in touch about this, please email us at research@transportforthenorth.com or get in touch with us via Twitter, Facebook or LinkedIn. Thank you all very much again for joining us, and I hope to see you at the next forum on the 18th of August.